My name is Nicholas, and I'm gonna walk you through how I built this tropical beach terrain board. I was inspired by the Battle of Scarif from the movie Rogue One, one of my favorite Star Wars movies. I am a pretty big Star Wars fan, and Scarif was just such an iconic location, and the battle scenes were some of the best Star Wars has offered, in my opinion anyways. I've always wanted to be able to play games on a board like that. That tropical blue water, white sand. So I went ahead and I made one. The goal of this table was to build a tropical board with as much modularity as possible and still play well. So I wanted the pieces to be able to be moved around as much as they needed to be able to be. We wanted to be able to play games of Warhammer 40K on it, as well as hopefully some Star Wars Legion in the future. I'd really like to see that happen. I also wanted to try doing water effects without going the resin route. That's really popular, but it's a lot of work, a lot of skill that I might not have. It's also really expensive. So for this, I used an alternative to resin for making water effects, and I think I'm 90% happy with it, as opposed to what a resin pour water effect would look like. I learned quite a bit, and doing this method in the future, I'll probably get better at it and learn to do it even better. But the biggest thing is how much cheaper it was than resin, as I said before. This entire board, all the supplies, probably cost around $150 Canadian. And I have enough supplies left over to make a couple more tables. Before I go any further, I wanted to invite you, if you enjoy our stuff, to consider joining our Patreon through the link below. It has been so much fun interacting with our fans through our Discord or Patreon itself, and sharing pictures of our work in progress, and that interaction is very cool. Honestly, guys, if you're watching, you're the best. There's a lot of other benefits, like getting early access to our battle reports. Right now, we're actually having a campaign goal on Patreon to try to get 1,000 supporters. Because if we can get there, Jack said I could buy a Manta. It's one of the biggest models Games Workshop produces. Like, seriously, I think it's like this big. We will get to do a series of build videos on it and eventually get it on the channel in as many ways as we can. I'm thinking like, what about a kill team? A full game of kill team on a Manta? Yes, please. Apocalypse, maybe an air battle? If that sounds like fun, please consider supporting us. But you know what? Even if you can't, thank you for supporting us and watching our shows and everything you guys do to support what we do. It's amazing. Reading the comments and interacting with our community is probably one of the highlights of our day. All right, you ready? Let's build a table. Well, let's get started on this table. The first thing I did is get a lot of foam. This is the insulation foam. Sometimes it comes in pink, sometimes it comes in blue, different density levels. But what I did is take a hot wire cutter. Basically, it's a cheap little thing from Amazon. It's a metal rod heated by electricity that cuts through foam really nicely. Slowly and gradually, I built up the beach heads and the different things that are gonna make the dunes. I got a whole bunch of these little plastic palm trees from Amazon as well. Bought about 160 in total to make this board. It came with a whole bunch of little tiny plants as well, and you know what? They were cheap and quick and worked really well. It also came with these. I've included the link to where I bought these from Amazon in the description below. They work really well, and if you want to go the extra mile, you could dry brush them and go a bit further. Also, a very essential step at this point is to test out the board with a willing subject. Gotta make sure it's gonna play well. Next up, painting the boards. I had bought 2 big MDF boards that I painted first a dark blue with a rattle can, a spray can, and then went over with a light blue, trying to go kind of where I was gonna put the island. Next, time to get a little messy. I'm gonna take a mixture of white PVA glue and water, probably about 50-50, and cover these islands in glue and then sand. I used a mixture of about 80% fine sand and then 20% coarse sand to try to give it a little bit of that Cancun feel of very white, fine sand beaches. after I'd poured sand probably everywhere and got sand all over my floor, I waited for it to dry and then carefully dumped all of it into a big giant bucket. I then took a light brown, a milk chocolate kind of color. I used bulk paints from a dollar store to make it a little bit cheaper, as you don't need expensive paint for this point. Next, I took a off-white tan kind of color and built up the color, trying to get to that white sand beaches. I dry brushed all over all the islands, and then lastly, I was gonna go over it with a white. I then got to take my trees, and this is the fun part. I could just poke them right through into the foam, and mostly they would stay. If I wanted to, I could put a little bit of glue in there to make them stay a little bit more, but doing this allowed me to be a bit more modular and test it out where I wanted to. Ta-da! Taking some more white glue, I was now going to attempt to do the flocking, the bush, the grass. It really gives it that green look and makes it closer to what Scarif looks like. I took some glue, poured it all over, got some water, mixed it all together, and then started putting the grass down. This is actually GW static grass. I bought from them quite a while ago and been sitting in my cupboard for quite a while. Now it's time for the water effects. Don't forget your mask, because we're going to be using some chemicals here, but the first thing is surprisingly caulking. I'm using specifically an acrylic-based caulking, translucent, even though it comes out of the tube white. It will dry clear. I was very skeptical that this would work as well, but I wanted to try it because it's a much cheaper method of doing this. I can get a thing of caulking for like $3. I also then cover it with IPA. This is 99% alcohol. This is a chemical. It can be bad for you, so make sure you are not getting it on your skin and not inhaling the fumes. Then you mix it together, and you will mix for a long, long time. I mean a very long time. And what the IPA is doing is preventing the caulking from drying instantly, because the caulking is intended to dry as soon as possible and you can't really spread it around. The IPA allows it to be more spreadable. Now you may get these chunks as you're seeing in the glass right there, but that's okay. If you keep stirring it, you can get them to gone. You gotta kind of really work at it hard. However, even if you don't, that's okay. I found I was able to spread it with the brush, and I actually was able to use those chunks to make more texture with it. Either way, I highly suggest you test this on a piece of board or spare wood somewhere before you put it on your nicely painted board, just to make sure you aren't wrecking something or have mistakenly gotten the wrong caulking, because I did that in the first place and it did not work and I had to restart. Oh, that was fun. Remember, it has to be an acrylic-based version. The other kinds will not work. Next, you're gonna take a big paintbrush, and this paintbrush will get ruined, so be prepared for that. Now you're gonna slather it all around, and then I took a trowel, a little scraper kind of thing, and kind of tried to make waves, like dragging the chunks, if you were, that's what those white spots there are, to spread them out and try to create some texture here. I'm trying to spread it all the way around, and you gotta kind of do this a little fast because the stuff will dry and be unable to be worked with. But the IPA does help. Next, I took a paintbrush and started dabbing it, and I'm creating shallows here. I'm not creating ocean waves. So I'm just looking for texture at this point. So I'm going up and down, and what it's doing is creating this kind of wavy texture. As you can see, it looks wet, it looks rainy, it looks kind of like there's a little bit of flowing water to this. Now, this is gonna dry a lot clearer than that. So don't worry about how it looks right at this point. It's gonna be a lot clearer than that. Now for this section I do want some waves. This is closer to the edge of the beach, so there should be some waves. So I use the paintbrush to spread out those chunks and really try to get it as even as I can. I'm going up the beach a little bit and trying to create that texture on top of that sand that I've painted previously. Lastly, I took the paintbrush and I herded the big chunks of white caulking into these waves. I kind of pressed it down and stippled it down up and down the beach. However, it's not gonna dry like this. Eventually, most of this texture is gonna be a little bit more transparent and go away. The thicker you can make it, the more texture you will have. One thing I wish I would have done is been a bit more aggressive with the texture and not been as timid. And then I could have had bigger ridges for instance, the waves. Now this is what it's gonna look like when it's dry. It's going to be a lot clearer. What I did then go with is I took a little bit of white and a small paintbrush and I dabbled up on the waves to try to just influence them stand out a bit more. And there we have it. We have a water table board that has some texture that looks like waves and frankly looks really cool at a fraction of the price of resin. Last step you're gonna wanna do is I took some varnish. Now this is specifically paintable clear varnish that I then just lathered all over it, ensuring to make it shiny like water as well as protect the texture underneath, because the texture underneath, the caulking will be very tacky and it will get damaged from play on top of it. Doesn't that look like water? I'm so happy with how this looked. Add a lot more bushes, trees, flocking, and you've got yourself a board that is really unique and a cool visual style that's a lot of fun to play on. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. It was pretty cool to try a project this big. I haven't actually tried a project this big before. As I said in the beginning, I'm about 90% happy with how the water effects ended up working as opposed to resin. I do wish that I'd spent some more time building up the waves and the texture on it more. I think it would have gone a long ways. I also advise you, if you're thinking of trying this out, to be patient and let everything dry properly. For instance, I got a little impatient and started doing the flocking as soon as I could rather than waiting for all the varnish to dry. And now my clean, pristine beaches have little bits of flocking in them that I can't get out. Mildly frustrating, mildly frustrating. I also realized that the hills and beaches could have benefited probably from a bit more sanding before I put the sand on it to, well, get them a bit more gradual and less ridge look. I still think this whole board ended up giving us some amazing pictures. We've actually got a game coming up very shortly playing Warhammer 40K on it. We called it Pacific Grim, big robots against big demon monsters. In the future, we also want to try to get some Star Wars content on it as well. But before we can get Star Wars content, we got a lot more painting to do first. So let us know what you think on this table below and the process of building it. And until we see you next time, play on.